In September 2019, I was given the honor of interviewing Missionary Jonathan Strickland. I have known him since college, where we became lifelong friends and shared many wonderful memories. My life took me into evangelizing, and then from there into pastoring. His life took him back to the missions field. He had grown up on the missions field, and his ministry took him back to missions. He has had such a tremendous exposure to cross-cultural evangelism. He has been exposed to large churches, where he was a pastor of a quite large church in the nation of Greece. It has also exposed him to building churches, starting literally with his own family and a kitchen table. He has done that in Ireland. He's now the pastor of several churches in the Dublin area, and he is a man of faith, and it was my honor to interview him, and I want to share that with you right now. It's not a perfect quality, but it's definitely worth sharing, and I wanted you to be able to experience it. God bless. I'm glad to have you here, and I'd like to take a little time here and hear your vision and have you express some of the deep wisdom of your years. So why don't you just start by introducing yourself and talking a little bit about your path to missions and your path to ministry.
I'm Jonathan Strickland. I am a missionary to the country of Ireland, and I am presently pastor of two churches in North Dublin and West Dublin. Ministry and mission really began for me at a very early age. My father was a church planner as well as a missionary, and my earliest memories are of all of the functions and details and activities that go around church planning and planning churches overseas. I remember helping my father build buildings at a very early age, falling asleep on church pews and being carried home in the middle of the night. We just didn't know there was any other way to live. We thought it was the greatest life, swimming in the baptismal pool without our parents knowing about it. Just growing up a preacher's kid was, for me, the best life. It was the greatest life, and just many fond memories. And what I appreciate is that my parents involved us in their ministry, not by demand, but allowing our gifts and talents to be used. And my brother and I were always musical and gifted in that way, and we enjoyed singing at events and eventually traveling around with my father and even doing outdoor events. It was just always adventurous and exciting. Then at the age of 15, when I was about to get my driver's license, really began to exercise my independence and find my way in life. My father, I remember very vividly, came into the family and was very emotional with us about feeling a call to the land of Greece. Having grown up in Louisiana, nothing could seem farther away than Greece. And not being of any Greek heritage, it seemed strange to our friends and to our family that my father would want to take us all to such a strange place. But I remember how God used me in that decision and helping my family. It was a few months earlier that I was just praying with our youth group in our normal prayer session, and God spoke to me very clearly and said, "There's a move coming in your life, a great move." I felt so strongly about it. I voiced it to my friends and to my fellow youth ministers that were in the group, and I said, I don't feel like we will be here much longer. I don't know what that means. I don't understand why I'm saying this, but I felt God has spoken to me that I don't feel that we're going to be in this place much longer. And it was just a few days later that my father came to address the family and to share with us what God was saying to him and speaking to him. I'll never forget when I spoke up in that meeting and I told my father, I said, "Hey, I've already voiced this. I've already spoken it to my friends." And I watched the rest come upon my father's face when he realized that God had gone before him and prepared our hearts and prepared his family for this move that for him was a great challenge, and he didn't want to make that step unless we were all in it together. These are just memories that formed me and created me an appreciation for ministry long term. And I watched the sacrifices that my parents made, but even though we didn't have much in those early years, we had a sense of purpose and mission that was throughout our family. And it was truly a family calling and a family effort. And we worked together and grew together. And God just blessed richly our lives in that way. And so that's my introduction to missions and ministry. And from there, I began to pursue my own calling and my own ministry. It goes back to my roots. It's all I've ever known. I wouldn't know how to be anything else. It's my bones. It's my makeup. And although it hasn't always been easy, and it has always asked things of me that I felt like I didn't necessarily have to give, but God has always proven faithful, and He's taken little and done much with it. And it's been truly a great ride, great experience.
How would you describe Europe as a mission field? You've been exposed to it broadly for decades.
Yeah.
You came of age in a European country. You went to school in European countries. You traveled all over Europe. Europe, it's unique. It has a storied history, fairly wealthy, fairly well educated. Talk a little bit about your experience of Europe as a harvest field.
It was one of the most eye-opening experiences in my life when we first arrived in Greece, and just the difference of everything. Not just a few things, but everything was different. Even the language was very different. The lettering, the Greek lettering, it looked like mathematical equations rather than a language. I remember just looking at signs and saying, "Wow, what does that say? What does that mean?" And then coming from a culture that was familiar with. Coming out of the Bible Belt, let's just say it that way. Coming out of the Bible Belt, people are familiar with faith and personal faith, and coming in contact for the first time with a corporate faith. And what I mean by that is our country was built on separation of church and state. And if you'll observe it, you'll understand that from that grew this awareness that faith is something personal. And we do take our faith very personal in the United States. And that's why we have so many different denominations and so many different groupings of Christianity, because we all see it as our personal journey, our personal experience with God. Moving into an established European culture where for generations faith was something that was corporate. Churches were a nationalized church. What I mean by that is if you were Greek, you were Greek Orthodox. You had no choice. And to be a citizen, you had to be baptized into the church. And this wasn't for a few years, this wasn't for decades, this was for generation after generation after generation. And how that affects the mentality of people and how they view faith was an eye-opener for me. Because when you begin to share your faith from a personal experience and a personal journey, they could not relate. They could not connect with your story because it was just so unfamiliar to them. How can you do this was their question many times. How can you just have this sort of independent relationship with God without going through the church and the mechanisms of the church? This is impossible. This is not comprehensible. And I remember spending not minutes but hours with people trying to share that experience and that faith with them, and them not being able to get past that veil in their life. And really, as I ministered more in Europe, I realized this was a common thing throughout Europe, where for generations, if you were German, you were Lutheran. If you were French, you were Catholic. If you were English, you were Anglican. This was just built in. And getting past those barriers, getting past those veils required patience and a cultivation of love for the people. And by cultivating a love for the people, cultivating a love for the culture and understanding their journey, and rather forcing them to assimilate into your experience, starting where they were, and through growing cords of friendship and love and bonds and connection and building trust, helping them to make their own journey to a personal experience with God. And it was not always pleasant. It was not always easy, and it wasn't always able to be defined in a 1, 2, 3. Okay, here's what you do to reach this type of person. It seemed like always on a personal basis, based upon the individual, their experiences, their stories. You had to take time and get to know them, get to know their experiences, and get to know who they were, and grow that trust so that you could lead them into a personal relationship with God. And so this was a shock to the system when we came to Greece. I'll never forget that. I'll never forget the struggles that not only I experienced, but my father experienced, our family experienced, in trying to adapt. And what we learned is it's very important to assimilate and to do your very best to listen and learn and hear someone else's story. And then that's a good starting point to share your story.
So as Christian leaders, all of us are seeking our path. Why don't you talk a little bit about that, about your path, about the ups and the downs, about direction, and about your continual refocusing, kind of your process of staying on path.
Leadership for me is vital church growth. And as far as personally, I've been blessed to lead on just about every level within a church ministry. And I only knew how to model what had been modeled before me. And leadership in my family and in my father's exempling was just service and serving others and serving people. And what I learned in my journey was the importance of, first of all, defining my gifts and my area of service, serving there and cultivating that ministry and finding the joy in serving others.
One of the unique contexts of your ministry is the vast cultural separation that is your daily life. Europe has become a harvest field for immigrants because of the opening of immigration, as you've told me. And so a typical congregation for you will have just a vast array of cultural contexts. And so I'd like you to talk about pastoring and pastoral care in that circumstance of the tremendous range of expectations of the people that you're pouring your life into.
Yeah, as I told you earlier, when we first went to Europe, the landscape there was more working with the indigenous people and dealing with their corporate view of faith. But during our serving there, with the coming of the European Union and the common currency and the common borders and the encouragement for immigration, ministry swiftly changed in Europe to where our churches were being inundated with people from every corner of the earth. And so then we became challenged to minister to a different groups of people, different dynamics, different cultural barriers and challenges. And this is something that we've had years of learning, I would say, because it's been a learning process. Just when I first became pastor in Crossroads in Athens, it was already a multicultural church. But coming again from serving in North America, it was a bit of a shock to the system when you could give a directive, give a vision, and 14 different cultures would take it 14 different ways. And I had to learn I couldn't lead from my desk. I couldn't lead from my office. I had to learn to lead from kitchen table to kitchen table, from coffee house to coffee house, and spending time and again listening and learning the cultures that I was attempting to serve. And there were certain cultures that you had to deal with a softer touch and a softer hand, while other cultures needed a strong voice and a very clear direction and answer from their pastor. That process was not always painless, but it was very transformative in how I began to see ministry and understand how to minister to people. And it really changed me. It really changed me because I became more focused on the people rather than my purpose for being there, my personal ambitions and goals and dreams. I began to realize, hey, I need to come down to the people and understand them and relate to them better. And just so many stories are flooding into my mind and experience. I don't know where to start. I remember a specific experience I had that was quite an eye-opener to working with different cultures. As an individual, I'm not very confrontational. I kind of take the approach, can't we just all get along? Can't we just all be friends? Definitely the path of peace is the path well trodden for me. But I've learned in pastoring, there are times that you need to be confrontational, and there are times that you need to speak the truth with love. And I remember in a particular culture, I was not scoring high among this culture for a few months because of my approach. I didn't realize it, but I was always trying to please everyone and make sure everybody was happy, and they were just not comfortable with this leadership style. And I remember there was a particular minister that had been sent out by the previous pastor to oversee one of our daughter works. His production was not where it should be, and there were some things that definitely I could see could have been done better. But again, in my soft approach, I went to him. I tried everything in my toolbox to encourage him and bring him helpful guides, and it just seemed to make him despise me more and more. And I'll never forget when he quit. He gave up on the ministry, and we replaced him with someone else, and he came back to the mother church, and you could tell he was agitated, he was frustrated, he was upset with me, he was upset with the church. And we had a fantastic service one Sunday, and the worship was great, and the response was tremendous. And so after the service, people were still lingering around the front, and there was a lot of appreciation going on, and people hugging each other. And I was on the other side of the platform visiting with some guests that had come to be with us that day, and I got called by one of our lead ushers and said, "Pastor, you need to come over here quickly." And they brought me to the other side of the auditorium where there was quite the tussle and going on. And here was this former daughter work pastor in the face of one of my cultural leaders screaming at her. I've never had a response like this, but it was like the holy indignation got a hold of me. And I remember this guy's about 6'4", but I grabbed him by the top of his shoulder and I turned him around and I got in his face and I said, "You need to be thanking this woman." And I began to point at the other leaders who had sacrificed and their groups had given to keep him in place. It was where our daughter work was about 6 hours away from the mother work, and they were supporting him and helping he and his family stay there. And I knew how much that particular leader had given to that cause, and their group had given to that cause. And I said, "You need to be thanking her. You need to not be in her face, but you need to be humbling yourself and thanking her every day, because what you were able to accomplish was by no small measure because of their giving and their support." And I said, "I've just had about enough of this pity party that you're on, feeling sorry for yourself and feeling like it's everybody's fault but your own, that you feel like you haven't accomplished what you were supposed to accomplish." And I said, you need a good dose of some humility right now." And I was right in his face, and I may have worded it a little bit differently, but all I know is there was a fire in my bones, and I got in his face. And I think of it now, I'm just not that courageous, and especially a man so daunting. But I'll never forget the response. There was a silence, and then I'll never forget, he hit the floor and he started kissing my feet, and he started saying, "Thank you, Pastor, for telling me the truth. Thank you, Pastor, for telling me what I needed to hear." And he began to confess right there in church, "I am a Jonah. I am a Jonah. I have run from the call of God in my life." What we discovered was God had called him back to his home country to go and start a church years before. And instead of going there, he saw the opportunity to be a pastor in the daughter work, and he had asked the previous pastor if he could do that. And he said, "The reason God didn't bless me is because I didn't go where he sent me." And today, I'm happy to say that he went. Because of that confrontation, He began to set his affairs in orders. He went back to his country, and today he has planted a church, and we, the Crossroads Church, helped him build a building there. He has his own building, he has his own church in his country today, and God is blessing those efforts. And so this is one of the experiences I had to learn how to deal with different cultures. It helped me tremendously with that particular culture going forward. I knew that I needed to speak straight, and I needed to speak the truth in love. It was what went a long way to help me grow respect and cords of influence in that community.
If a person felt like they were struggling with cross-cultural effectiveness, how would you speak to them to have them maybe see some blind spot that they have? What would be your guidance to them, just kind of back of the envelope guidance to them?
Well, I can't claim this view. I've read it somewhere, I can't remember exactly where, but someone once said there's a difference between a perceived need and a felt need. And this is what I have learned in multicultural ministry is often we as leaders, we can look at a situation and we can perceive what needs to be done. And sometimes it's fairly obvious, the progress that needs to be made and the areas of work that need to be undertaken to make that progress. But what I've learned is you can't motivate people to see that perception without first dealing with their felt need. And with each community that's different, that's unique. Some communities come in and they have a huge inferiority complex. They feel very, very unworthy, and you have to deal with that. You have to shore that up a bit. You have to strengthen their confidence in their gifts and in their faith and the grace of God to bring them from point A to point B before they can begin to see where you're trying to bring them. What I learned is, again, as I said earlier, you sometimes have to come down to their level. I'll tell on myself. When I first began to pastor at Crossroads, again, coming from North America, being a pastor's kid, a missionary's kid, there's a sense of, I know how to do this, I've got this, and a sense of entitlement. And I remember my first few years of pastoring there, again, I tried to do it from my desk, from my office, and it wasn't working. And every Sunday, and I'm just give you a little bit of background. In Athens, most of our people were illegal, number one. But number two, because of this, they were often at the mercy of their employers. They were there on work contracts that weren't legal. Often their employers took advantage of this. And 90% of our congregation worked and lived in either boarding houses or dormitories that were set up by the factories that were working them. And they were only allowed out for a 24-hour period a week. And that would be from Saturday around 6 to Sunday at 6. The reason I'm telling this, every Sunday I would get invited to birthday parties, to numerous, house blessings. And these were things that just weren't always a part of our culture here in North America. Sunday was for going to church. Sunday was for, family. And I had to learn that what was most important was that I be at these things and that I be with these people. And I'll never forget when I began to go to these birthday parties. And sometimes it'd be 5 birthday parties in one day. We would leave church and we would go from house to house to house to house to house. And it was exhausting at times. And my wife would even ask me, why are we doing all of this? And I said, we're never going to be able to bring them where they need to go if we don't understand where they're at and the life that they live. And it opened my eyes tremendously to this. Number one, the sacrifice that these people gave. Literally, they had 24 hours of liberty and freedom, and they chose to give it to God. And often they would go from church to a Bible study group or a home group or a small group, and then come back to church and maybe have a cultural service or a prayer meeting. They would literally choose to spend it with God's people or in the house of God, that 24 hours. That was all they had, and they gave it to God. And that moved me, and I realized, wow, these people are committed and they're dedicated. And the more that I ate their food, and the more that I sat in their kitchens, were often it would be 2 or 3 families sharing a 1-2 bedroom apartment for those 24 hours because they had to live in with their employers or in their dormitories during the week. It would be crowded, it would be cramped, it wasn't always comfortable, but the more I spent time around those tables, the more I learned and understood their stories, the more I was able to speak to them from where they were and influence them in the direction that I could see they needed to go. I teach this to young aspiring missionaries. I feel strongly about this, that we must learn to listen. And one of the big things is eat their food, for God's sake. Eat their food. Don't go turn your nose up to their food, but go sit down and eat their food. And there's some things that, you know, we prayed earnestly before we ate. Amen. But just, it's amazing how much food and gathering around the table is important to many cultures, so very important. And having pastor in home made a major difference in my influence. And today, so many of those leaders that doubted me in the beginning, that wasn't sure, well, today they still call me, they still reach out to me, and they still love us with a love that's just, it's eternal. I mean, it'll always be there.
That's one of the best endorsements of small groups ministry I've ever heard in my life.
Exactly.
What you just described is small groups outreach, small groups ministry. Right. Did you find the exact same thing transitioning from Greece to Ireland? Because I know that in Greece you had a fairly established congregation because of the years of ministry there. And then when you transitioned to Ireland, it was like starting over cold.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Definitely what I learned in Greece served me well in Ireland. And it was the reverse. We started with the small group in our home and then eventually in other believers' homes and carried that forward of what we had learned. And what we're finding is really we're just using the Sunday for a celebration. Really, that's all Sunday is. It's just a coming together of our small groups. Our small groups are continuing to expand and grow, and we're doing more and more things through the small groups. I just think it's the way forward, and especially within the dynamics of Europe, buildings, buying buildings, even just renting buildings is very, very challenging and expensive, but homes are always available. We not only now just meet in home groups with our families, we have family groups, we have what we call specialized groups, which are marriage and parenting. We have marriage and parenting groups that meet once a month. We have just men groups and women's groups that meet. But we also go into the youth. We have what's called our Ignite group, which is our young adult group that meet weekly. And then we have our Rising Flames group, which is our teenage group that, again, they meet weekly in a home. And then our SWAG group, which is our preteen group. They meet weekly. And what we're finding is just in our SWAG group 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had children from an estate, living in a state where the home group was going to be meeting that week, and they heard about it, and 3 or 4 of the kids asked if they could come, and they came and they enjoyed it so much. Now, not only are they coming when the meeting is in that estate, but now they are making the effort to having their parents bring them when it's in another estate, in another home, week to week. So it served me well, and it's how we planted both of our churches in Dublin, and now we're planting a church in another city called Galway through the same thing, small groups and meeting in homes.
So it sounds like without small groups, there would be no, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? It's like the small group comes before the church.
Yeah.
What's interesting in American church culture, particularly in the South, is that we have whole groups of people who feel like they can't survive without that Sunday worship experience, and look, I'm not unsympathetic to that. This is my religious experience. This is how I grew up. And I feel like that if you encourage a small group, they feel like they're stepping down in some way. They're not getting fed, that kind of a thing. And here you, as a missionary to a post-Christian society, shall we say, you could not attract these people with what we call good church, but you can attract them with small groups and then introduce them to what we call good church. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think a home environment is an environment people can trust and and be comfortable with. They're not going to come into your home unless they know you. You know, this is just an example. There are certain cultural groups that we are reaching into, just my wife and I personally, that are very challenging. There are some differences in faith that are making that very, very challenging. But where we're connecting with them is on a personal level through the schools, having children in the same schools, and by growing the relationship and bond, we've gotten them into our home and around our table. And it's just an area of trust, and it is mind-blowing, the honest conversations that we have had around my table, where you would think that we would naturally be at odds because of our faith difference. But it's amazing the similarities, the desires that these people have are so similar to our desires. And I think there's scriptural example for this. In Jesus' ministry, he took a much more comparative approach when dealing with people from outside of his traditional faith. You remember the story of the Roman centurion who called him to come, or they asked him, say, hey, he's a good man, he built us a synagogue, his daughter is ill, come and, or his servant was ill, come and pray. And Jesus was on his way, and the man met him and said, look, there's no need to come to my house. And there was a sense of maybe that cultural conflict there and that embarrassment. Look, you're going to put yourself in a bad position if you come to my house, but I understand authority, and you're a man of authority, speak the word. And Jesus used that as an opportunity to show that the faith of that individual was greater than any faith that he had witnessed in all of Israel. And he used a comparative approach to build a bridge where with those of his faith, the religious rulers and the Pharisees and the Sadducees were some of his most combative and critical conversations that you read were to these people. And so this is the approach that we've always tried to take, is get them around the table, get them in your environment and grow those cords of trust and relationship, and you find you have more in common than not. Even in my wife's experience, she is so close to breaking into a community that really is mind-blowing, because God is using her through our kitchen table, just sharing tea and cakes and coffee together with people. And so, yes, I believe that it's vital. It is vital to growing communities and to reaching into communities that normally you would not connect with.
America is probably 20 years, if not something like that, behind Europe as far as that whole theme of the post-Christian society. And one thing we noticed here in the States, particularly in the South, if a kid grows up in a church environment, then they're moved by the church environment. And when they visit church, you're singing Amazing Grace and the tears start to flow and they come to the altar. We celebrate. A lost sheep has been found. We celebrate that. They have that culture embedded in them. But as we become an increasingly post-Christian society, good church is not what moves people. They don't know Amazing Grace. Yeah. They don't come and they caught up in that. We think of it primarily as the presence of God, and we're right to do so. That's not wrong. That is our comfort zone of experiencing the presence of God. All biblical societies have their comfort zone of experiencing God, but you go to Ireland, they don't know Amazing Grace. They don't tear up when they sing Jesus Loves Little Children. They don't have this sentimental attachment. They just have that mystery something in the heart inclining them toward God. And so I think the mistake we make is we think good church, good cultural comfort zone experience of the presence of God church is our primary outreach tool, and you're saying no, it's the kitchen table.
Yeah.
They don't know Amazing Grace. I've got to get them around the table. I've got to express God's charity toward them, and I've got to let them explore these subjects of the great mystery of God.
Yeah. And
so I'm so glad that you talked about this, because our church right now is in that process of really empowering people to have the mission field of the kitchen table.
Yeah.
And so I'm so glad you've been able to share this with us. All right, I'd like you to just sum up a little bit. We've talked some about your experience in missions, and we've talked some about the lessons you've learned. And I'd like you to just sum up and talk about kind of a closing word of encouragement to leaders and believers wherever they are.
Well, there are definitely different models and methods within the kingdom, but I think for us that what has projected our personal experience, our personal passions and burdens and loves, the best is that organic approach. And I know that when I came to Ireland, God spoke to that to me so clearly. I am surrounded by, in missionary work, it's common to sponsor big events, to sponsor crusades, to sponsor big groups coming over and putting on this stage, this identity and image that we want to portray to them, and what we're here to bring you these great things from our experience, and it's all meant well, and it's all often planned and programmed with the greatest of excellence, and the presentation is well. But it's been my observation, if you want to grow things long term, time must be a part of that equation. And when I went to Ireland, it was the first time that I had ever planted anything from ground up. I've always been around established ministries and then taking those ministries and trying to bring them to another level. So it was a first step for me, and I prayed. I said, God, I know this method, I know that method, I've been around this, that, and the other. What approach do we need to take? And God spoke very clear to me and said, just let it grow. And I knew what that meant. I knew that if we would just print up 10,000 flyers and just started passing those flyers and saying we're starting a church, the first people that would come were the people that want you to pay their light bill, want you to put gas in their car, and not that those aren't legitimate needs, but I realized we didn't have the resource at that time to minister in that way. And what we needed were people that could be building blocks and cornerstones to growing the culture that we wanted to grow in Ireland. And so we just trusted God, and we opened our home to people in the community. As we began to meet them, we began to bring them around our table, we began to share our story and our experiences that opened into different Bible studies and different teaching opportunities. And it's amazing how God is so faithful. I remember the other thing that God spoke to me was family. Family. I'm going to build this church on families. And I know the definition today of family is much different than in the generation that we grew up in. But a family is a home. It's a unit, and whether that's a blood family, a mom, a dad, children, or it may be a mixture of people living together, trying to make their way in life, but it's a home. It's a home. And I felt God placed in my heart that I'm going to build this on families and build this on homes. And it's amazing that through starting with my living room, through the connections and the people that we met and the people that we have shared with, how God has added to our church strong families. When I say we don't have a large fringe crowd, it's true. We have a solid 85 people who are sharing, who are giving, who are engaged, who are involved in what we are doing. Different stages of spiritual growth, but they're all engaged and involved. And my last sermon to them before I came over here to do this traveling was remember. And I went back and talked about some of the things that we had talked about over the last 3 years. And I was in shock and in awe at how far people had come and how much we had grown just organically and by being patient. And I've encouraged some of my friends who have been more big event oriented, but are frustrated with sometimes the lack of long-term results that come out of that, and encourage them to just go and find a family and pour themselves into them and be patient, and don't try to take time out of the equation. Don't try to bypass the process, but let the process work. I believe that innate in the kingdom, if you're building the kingdom in you and you are sharing the kingdom as we have been asked to share, and we are loving others as we love ourselves, innate in that is you're going to influence, you're going to connect with people who are hungry and who are ready to receive. And God will bring them to you, and He will lead you to them. And I look back at all of the family connections we have made, and it's incredible. Without advertising, without beating the streets, just home to home, house to house, family to family. And sometimes the family you start with is not the family that connects with you, but it's a family they know that you connect through them. And you find that hungry heart, you find that family that's ready to contribute and to be a part. And so I can't stress enough the need for being consistent and being patient, and let love work. Let love work. We all face discouragement sometimes. We all face disappointment sometimes. But what I have learned is disappointment and discouragement is the sure sign that I am thinking of my needs above the needs of others. I've always, when I start to feel discouraged, I start looking for somebody else's need I can meet. And once I do that, the joy returns and the confidence returns. It's not by sight, but it's by faith. It's the ability to know that if I keep working this field, if I keep cultivating this relationship, something good's going to come out of this. And the joy is in serving the kingdom in that way. And this is how I combat the challenges and discouragements. I find another home, I find another family to get into that home, get into that situation, and just share and give what I have. That's the other thing. You can only give what you have. You can only share what you have. And I don't try to be something I'm not. I try to just be real. This is who I am. This is what I have. This is what we live. You can see that. And I find that it works, and people gravitate towards authenticity. And so.
Well, I just want to say thank you for giving us some of your time. You're not just a missions hero, you're a small groups hero. And I know you don't like that phrasing, but I don't care. And I love that kitchen table analogy. I love the small groups analogy, because that is where so many people are really, they're in the trenches with you.
Yeah.
They aren't sent to a foreign country, say,
yeah,
but they have a kitchen table.
Yeah.
And so, at least speaking for First Church, all of you wonderful people who have kitchen tables, the Stricklands are kitchen table heroes.
Yeah.
And they're inviting you to be a kitchen table hero too.
Yeah.
So we love you guys.
Thank you.
God bless.